Hi, this is my video for the stakeholder readings that we did this module. So going through full length chapters, the principle was the first chapter that we looked at. This is a really interesting chapter because I feel like sometimes we make the principal out to be the bad guy or the villain as teachers. And I did kind of feel bad for the principal after reading this and felt like I sort of understood their viewpoint a little bit more. I know their job is definitely hard, but I feel like this chapter enlightened me a little bit as a teacher and a coach. So according to research that Fulham presented, they're not satisfied because they're basically overworked and underpaid. Something like 75% of them are working 7 days a week or something like that. That's crazy. And something should be done about it. I do have several friends that have gone from teaching to being a principal, and they had to get paid their teacher salary because they got paid more as a teacher than as a principal. So that's kind of interesting. And I also love the fact that Fulham discussed that the principal is the lead learner for the school. I do feel like there are some principals that seem to enjoy the power given with the position and don't expect themselves to be a learner. So I thought that was really cool that Fulham discussed that they're really the lead learner and that they should be learning along with the teachers and going through the PD and things like that with teachers. Next chapter discussed the student. I liked how Fulham discussed that the focus is now on concept application rather than memorizing rote material, which is absolutely true. That's what's happening right now with changes in end of course exams and things like that. But it does seem to increase the achievement gap, which I also agree with and have seen in the classroom, because students that are maybe poor readers and don't have as much home support could have gotten away with the memorization piece. But now that we're asking them to sort of understand and apply concepts, it is like really tough for these kids that are poor readers and don't have the home support. So it's almost impossible, which is, sad. Also, Fulham discussed when students connect in a situation that is relevant, engaging, and worthwhile, then they learn. So I think that we as teachers are starting to embrace this concept. We are just not being tested in that manner. It'd be awesome if, for instance, for science, there was a lab test where students, like a practical like you had in college. The logistics of that is crazy, and the cost, I understand. But if we want students to engage in relevant and interesting lessons, then they should be tested as such. The parent and the community was the next chapter. I thought it was interesting how Fulham said that they need to combine forces in order to be effective, which I agree. The parent and the community is almost one and the same. And it, in the past, has seemed like it's been parents and communities versus teachers and administrators. And he mentioned how whenever that gap slowly closes, then the stronger the school and the stronger the effectiveness for students. The district administrator, he talked about mostly superintendents in this chapter, but there could be other, curriculum supervisors, I guess, and assistant superintendents and things like that that would qualify under this chapter. They carry out lots of different functions with limited resources. Certainly, superintendents are hired and fired at the whim of locally elected officials that are on the school board, which is just craziness. And we're going to leave it at that. And the role of a superintendent is, unlike any other CEO, because we actually have children's learning to consider, and so it's a little more close to the heart and a little more important to the community. And so their role is actually more important than most CEOs, and it's viewed as such. So it's a tough position to be in. I would not want to be in it. Governments. This is interesting, I thought, because I actually interviewed our NCDPI rep for science for my stakeholder video. And so I thought it was interesting because the reform I discussed was PBIS, which is pretty well known, and she really just hadn't worked with it. Not that that was her fault or anything. She just didn't have the experience with working with that program. So it's interesting that on Full Inside, he says, they have the opportunity to push accountability and push incentives and foster capacity building. But in this case, for that reform, she didn't have any of those opportunities. So maybe the best governments have these opportunities, I guess, and take hold of them. Also, I liked how Fullen talked about that governments must be sensitive to local context when imposing ideas on a larger system. When we come up with state laws and things like that, for instance, this whole class size thing with K-3 classes, this is really a problem for a lot of school systems. Some school systems have to hire like 100 teachers and have nowhere to put these classes if this bill goes through. So I don't know that the government really took local context into consideration when they were creating this this law or whatever it is. Not that it's a bad thing, but it does take time to have change and money, and they're not providing any. So that's a huge issue right now. A couple of the readings that I pulled to support the stakeholder Fullen readings chapters is how is family support related to students' GPA scores. This was an interesting article because they basically looked at family support in terms of economics or family social support, and they looked at variations in GPA, and it was found that families that were able to economically support college students is what it was, that their GPAs varied less, but also as a replacement for that, families that were not able to give the economic support but were able to give the social support, those students also did not have a huge change in their GPA. They had a more steady GPA. So social support is just as great as economic stability, according to this research. And I thought that was really interesting because the family as a stakeholder is really important, particularly for younger college students, I'm sure, and obviously K-12 students. So that was a great support for that. The second article I pulled was promoting local languages in the Ugandan primary schools, the community as a stakeholder. What was interesting here is the schools were promoting local languages and trying to teach those languages again to natives and to kids in the elementary schools, basically. But the community really wanted them to know English. So there was sort of a disconnect between what the community thought would have been good for kids and what educators and decision makers thought was good for those kids. I do think that there needs to be a partnership there. Not that one is right over the other. Maybe they're both right. Maybe kids should learn all the languages. But I definitely understand the community's viewpoint in terms of the kids learning English to be able to go out and use the language in the world and make money and be successful. So that was a great article based on the community as stakeholder. Here are my references, and that's it. Thanks.